It's the only place I've ever gone where people weren't excited that you were there, initially. And it wasn't about me. It was just they were so broken and so mistrusting of leadership. A guy who'd been on staff over 40 years, probably in the first 6 months I was there, met with him just to get to know him. And he said, "Tim, you just need to know I don't trust you. And I don't think I'll ever trust any leader again."
Welcome to the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast. Today, we talk about the hardest assignment in ministry. Well, I would agree. This one's right up there. Tim Stevens, former executive pastor at Willow Creek, talks about his time at Willow Creek and turning around a church that was sinking fast. Talk about a tough assignment. Plus, we talk about firing well, something so many leaders struggle with, and finding momentum. It can be so fragile, right? Wherever you're watching, be sure to follow, subscribe, and leave a comment to join the conversation. And now, a word from today's partners, and then we'll dive right into my conversation with Tim Stevens. Today's episode is brought to you by my book, Didn't See It Coming. So as you'll hear in this episode, one of the most critical and often hardest leadership lessons is to believe the best about everything and everybody. But if you've been betrayed, if you're exhausted, or maybe the grind of ministry has made it easy for cynicism to take root in your heart, guess what? I'd love to help you. So I write about this phenomena in my best-selling book, Didn't See It Coming. It's all about how leaders can recognize the subtle challenges like cynicism and disconnection that sneak up on us and take us out if we're not careful. I'm convinced this takes out more leaders than moral failures. So in this conversation, you heard Tim talk about what he's struggling with. And if it resonates with you, Didn't See It Coming, I think, can give you a roadmap to lead with hope, clarity, and resilience, even in the toughest seasons. So you can get your copy of Didn't See It Coming wherever books are sold, and there is a link to buy it on Amazon in the description of this episode. So don't let what you didn't see coming take you out. Pick up the book today and discover what tens of thousands of leaders have discovered about the 7 challenges that no leader expects, but everyone experiences. This episode is brought to you by Amplify Plus from Ministry Brands. One thing you've heard me say a lot of times is time off won't heal you if the problem is how you spend your time on. Well, for so many pastors, our best hours get swallowed up by systems that don't work, right? Scattered tools, disconnected processes, constant admin. These hours are the very ones you could be spending on things that matter most. For example, investing in people, shaping vision, or leading your church toward its mission. That's why I want you to see what 55,000 churches nationwide are using Amplify Plus from Ministry Brands. It's a fully connected church management platform that brings your people, communication, events, and scheduling all into one place. When your systems work, your time on fuels the heart of ministry. Visit ministrybrands.com/amplify to learn more. Tim, 40 years of ministry. Congratulations.
Thank you. That just means
is that congratulations, condolences? Like, what is it?
Condolences, maybe.
Condolences? Okay.
We'll go with that.
You've had some lightning rod positions, but what I'd love to start with is what has changed the most in the 4 decades of ministry? It's funny, when you're our vintage, you have memories from the 80s, which is crazy. I have memories from the 70s, but I was a kid then. But, you were like an adult in the 80s. And what's changed the most in these 4 decades?
Was thinking and I do remember church ministry in the 70s because I was highly engaged as a junior high and high school student in ministry. And at the time, and it could have just been my tribe, it was bus ministry. That was the growing edge.
Gosh, we had one
Sunday
too.
School. Yeah. And
like the little
buying
orange
fleets
school
of
bus
buses.
kind of thing, yellow school bus.
Yep. And we would send these buses, and for a season I had as a bus captain, and we would visit all of our kids on Saturday, and then we would send buses into the inner city on Sunday morning, pick them up, take them to church, sing all the way there and all the way back. So that was kind of people were talking about that was the innovative ministry, was bus ministry. So you think about just the complexity. Yeah.
That would never fly today. I mean, parental anxiety is at an all-time high. It's like some stranger coming to pick up your kid in a yellow school bus and take him to church.
That and the idea of just kind of, typically the white suburban church going into the inner city, bringing them out to the suburbs to go to church, I think is a thing that would be complex this time.
Well, that's definitely a a factor. I mean, in our small town, we didn't really have that dynamic, but it was go pick up the kids whose parents won't take them to church. That was our school bus ministry. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that just what's changed, complexity. What growing large church doesn't have multiple locations now? That wasn't a thing at all. Online ministry, discipleship, complexities, now we're trying to figure out how do we disciple people who will only show up for, once every 4 or 5 or 6 weeks. And yet we're still kind of feeling responsible for or to them.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there wasn't even the executive pastor role per se back in the 70s or 80s. True or not true?
Yeah, I know when I first heard the term, it was probably in 88, and it was a very large church. I was working for the ministry, and we were doing some ministry in that church. And I'm like, executive, what? Like, what is that? And I actually asked the guy, can I follow you around for a couple days and just see what you do? Because we were there for a couple weeks. And it was really fascinating. That's when I first realized, I think I've found my calling, at least in that phase of life of like, I can actually be in
government at that point, like working for the city, or was that Tony Morgan who was working?
You're thinking of Tony, yeah.
No, Tony was working for the city back then.
I went into ministry I just barely turned 18, so I was from the get-go involved in some type of ministry in and around the church.
All right, so pick up the story. You followed this guy around for a while, and
yeah, there's just so I knew my grandpa was a pastor. Probably when I was 15, 16, it's like, I think I'm supposed to be in the ministry. I don't know what that means. I don't think I'm a good preacher. My youth pastor tried to make me a preacher. It's like, I don't think that's going to work. I didn't really like students even when I was one. So it's like, I don't think I want to be a youth pastor. Missionaries that came to my church and had the little slide projector, that didn't seem the thing I wanted to do. So when I met this guy and found out, like, I already knew by then I had some leadership, some administrative, some strategic giftings. It's like, there's a place for that in the church. That's pretty cool. And that really kind of sparked me of like, I think I found my calling.
Yeah. And, it's interesting because, I had Gordon MacDonald on at different points on this podcast. And he was reminding me that in the 70s, having a church in America over 1,000 people was highly unusual and very complicated. And in those early days, I think I first heard about executive pastors in the 90s. And it was probably at Willow Creek where you most recently served, from 2020 until 2023 or whatever. But that was a novel role, and everyone was like, exactly, what is an executive pastor? But it's sort of, my working definition has always been like the COO for a complex organization. Is that basically, what's your working definition of an executive pastor?
I think, so early on, my personal working definition was when I interviewed the very first time for an executive pastor role. I was at Granger. I was 27 years old. I'm meeting with Phil McMartin. He's the personnel chair, a lay guy in the church. And he says, basically, what do you want to do or how do you envision this role? And I said, I want to put feet to the vision. Like, I want to come alongside a visionary and really put feet to that vision, that dream that I can totally buy into and that I can help kind of see it happen. I've gotten a little bit more refined in my definition. So now I think of it, the executive pastor's job is to align people, strategy, resources, and culture so the church's vision actually happens. It looks a little bit different, small, medium, large churches, but I think in essence, that's what it is.
Are you familiar with Les McEwen's work and his visionary operator processor framework? A little bit, yes, or not so much?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. And I find, tell me if I'm wrong, but a lot of senior pastors have a visionary kind of bent. And I realized that when we hit about 600 and I hit a ceiling and I realized I need an operator. Now, I was years away from meeting Les McEwen. He was years away from writing Predictable Success and his other books. But, that to me, can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think there are probably church leaders listening who are visionaries and still don't even understand the gap or why it's not happening.
Yeah, and the book I know better than that is called Rocket Fuel, and the terms they use is visionary and integrator. Is kind of unlocks the magic of an organization. And in that context of the book, they're talking corporate marketplace. But to me, there's so much carryover, especially when you've got it dialed in between, like you said, a visionary who is, has a dream. They're coming in asking questions no one's asking. They plan a church when everyone says it won't work or we don't need one. And then they get in and they're doing everything at that point. And then they get into actually like building teams, building systems, building processes, managing people, figuring out how do we go through the hiring process? What if we have to let them and it just wears them out. And sometimes, most of the time, they don't make the curve. I mean, they survive. Most of them survive, but they don't make the curve. Most of them aren't wired to be both. If they do have a little bit of both wirings in them, probably the church will stay small to medium sized because they're kind of having to wear a bunch of hats and they're happy doing it. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's a ton of small churches in the country with pastors, shepherds, people that are having also to do the administrative strategy. But I love it when I see an integrator who doesn't want the number one job. They're usually not wired to preach. Some of them preach, but usually not. But man, they are great with people. They got high EQ. They know how to spot talent. They can bring great people on the team. They know how to develop people. They know how to set up some systems to unlock ministry so it doesn't get frustrating. And that's magic when you see that happen.
Did you ever aspire to be a senior pastor? Was that ever part of your framework over the decades? Never. Okay, this is what a lot of leaders don't understand, Tim. It's like everybody wants this job, right? I got to be careful. Have you ever drilled down on that? Like, what is it about you? And you're not alone. I've met lots of leaders who don't want to be in that number one chair. What is it about your heart, your vision, your calling, your satisfaction that means, I didn't ever want to be a lead pastor?
Great question. I've never been in the number one chair till 2 years ago when I launched out doing Leading Smart full time. So it's always been a second chair.
Which is your thing, right? It's been your hobby for 20 years, 30 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It was kind of a side thing for a long time that we just scaled up 2 years ago. But I've always felt up till that point called to the second chair. I loved, like I said earlier, put feet to the vision. I love to come alongside a visionary leader that just, I remember when I first went to Granger and the church was 250 people. Mark Beeson was the senior pastor, one of the greatest visionaries and communicators that I'd ever known. And he's passed away. But I just remember coming alongside and the church was stuck. And I couldn't do anything he could do, but he needed some stuff I could do in order to free that church up for growth. And man, we got to go for a ride for 20 years because he didn't want to do what I was doing and I didn't want to do what he was doing. And together we could make it work. And we had total trust in each other. So we had each other's backs and it just was magic.
Huh. Yeah, I think for a lot of senior pastors, it's hard to believe that someone would be content in that role over the long term, right? Because if you look at the profile of a lot of senior pastors, was student pastor, and then maybe they're in exec position, but they're always hoping to get that lead seat. Anything else about contentment in that role that either people who are in the second chair should realize, no, it's actually cool that I want to sit here, or that senior pastors need to understand about that particular profile and gifting that might not be native to the way we operate?
I think I talked to a lot of men and women who are in that second chair role, and I try to drill down because if ultimately they want to be in the first chair, that can become unknowingly, it could become toxic. It could become a barrier between them and their relationship because it's there. It may be subconscious. They want to preach a little bit more. They get a little bit frustrated because, the person in the number one chair isn't making decisions like they would make them. And they're starting to dream more and more and more about being in that role, and that can become subversive. So I encourage them, before it does become subversive or become a problem for that church, go do it. Don't do it within 30 miles of here, but go do it somewhere. If that's truly a calling and you've discerned it and people around you that know and love you well discerned it with you, then just go do that. And I would say for lead pastors, we always kind of project, we think, well, no one would want to do that because we don't want to do that. And so we all kind of project, kind of say no for people because it's who would want that job? But there are wired, people out there that are wired with that gift. And I bet over half of the executive pastors I work with went into that role from the marketplace. They're in their church and they just feel a call to ministry, and they're running a business, or they're an exec at AT&T or somewhere, and they have a real sense that they're supposed to come alongside their pastor initially to do that role. And that's pretty cool when that happens.
That's another, when you've either in your own experience as XP or in the work that you've done with other XPs, I think one of the things I've struggled with is, oh, you mean the stuff I really don't like, I'm really not energized by, and I really don't want to do, is actually what other people wake up excited to do every morning. And so sometimes we can feel guilty about offloading things, or we can just assume that nobody wants to do this. Number one, have you seen that dynamic? And number two, if you have, can you explain a little bit more so that people on both sides of the equation understand what's at stake?
Yeah, I definitely see that. And, I'll just say again, like, I think people, there are men and women, they're absolutely called to that. And it's not an easier job. It's just a different job. There's a weight that I highly respect for senior pastors and lead pastors. And most of my work right now is more with senior and lead pastors than it is with executive pastors. And just, so I'm getting a sense of like the weight that they carry and what keeps them up at night, what wakes them up in the morning is different than the executive pastor. I think for the executive pastor, there's a little bit of a squeeze where they're kind of a buffer from the energy that the senior lead pastor may walk into at any given day, and frustrated about this or that, or this isn't happening fast enough or whatever. So the executive pastor is absorbing this, and then trying to absorb the action or activity without absorbing the energy, and then passing that on to and trying to lead a healthy staff below their level. And there's a pressure and a weight to that too, and especially I've seen it like almost be soul crushing for leaders in that position because they're trying to absorb it without having like any kind of an outlet to they're not seeing a therapist. They don't have any good pastor friends that they're talking to that are somewhere else that they can kind of vent to and get perspective from. And
so I'll just soldier on and not delegate this. When you think about your different roles over the years, what were some of the things that you would wake up in the morning as an XP and say, oh, I can't wait to do this? Like, just give us a list of some of your favorite things, because I think when you see the content of that list, it reminds people who sat in my seat, no, people really love this.
Yeah, I think early on, it was buying land, property development, building development. Our first church, we were meeting in a movie theater. We didn't have land, didn't have a building. Like, if we're going to grow, we need that. And like, there's nothing within me right now that wants to be involved in a building project. But then those first 10 years, and I loved it. And I really, at the time, prided myself on bringing projects in under budget, not always on time, but under budget. We did 6 projects in a row under budget. And
Impressive.
So like managing that stewardship for the church just brought me great pride and joy, because it's like, man, these are tithes and offerings from people that don't have a lot. So let's handle it really well. I think as time went on, it became developing people, spotting talent, and then developing people. So we, lead teams, we spend so much sideways energy dealing with someone we shouldn't have hired or that we should have dealt with a long time ago. And it just sucks our time, our energy, our emotional, it's emotionally weighing on us because we know the family, we know the kids, and we know the people in their small group, and we don't want to be hurt. But so man, if you spend more time and get some gifted people on the front end, vetting who you're bringing on the team, developing those people, especially when you're hiring from within, you're developing them for a long time before they're ever on your team. And then you bring them on and continue to develop them and build a healthy culture so that they can thrive. Man, I could do that every day, all day.
You probably had your share of tough assignments in your time in leadership. If you could take us on a case study basis through your toughest assignment, what would you say your tough assignment was? And what were the elements that you had to contend with as you tried to deal with it?
Easy answer. The toughest assignment was jumping into Willow in 2020. We talked before about this. It's the only, I've only had 4 job changes in my life, so to speak. So it was the only one that I absolutely felt absolutely called. Like the others were good decisions, logical decisions, smart for my family. This one was a calling because I knew what I was walking into. And hardest thing I've ever done. It's the only place I've ever gone where people weren't excited that you were there, initially. And it wasn't about me. It was just they were so broken and so mistrusting of leadership. A guy who'd been on staff over 40 years, probably in the first 6 months I was there, met with him just to get to know him. And he said, Tim, you just need to know I don't trust you. And I don't think I'll ever trust any leader again. He was just so devastated. So people carrying that brokenness, there's a lot of just difficult times. So that was a really hard to go into a place that was in a nosedive as far as momentum happening, was shut down because of COVID, was sinking, financially sinking very quickly, and way, way, way overstaffed. So we had to make some really hard decisions initially just to get the staff right sized, the budget right sized, so that then we can build from there towards being a thriving, healthy church again.
And we talked about that in an entire episode. We'll link to it in the show notes. But, looking back on it now with even a little more perspective, you felt an absolute call to go there. You were actually, for the backstory, you were charged, you were Vandervlumen at the time, of finding the new lead pastor, and then ended up saying, yeah, and I'm called to go there as well, right? Which is insane. But, most leaders, first of all, wouldn't want that assignment if they could possibly avoid it. Secondly, most of us would have no idea how to approach it. And I would say, probably wasn't an unqualified success, but Willow is a thriving congregation that has a new chapter and a new era because of the 5 years of transition that you and Dave Dummett and the senior leadership team did, and Sean Williams, who's now there as the senior pastor. Willow has a future, and that was not clear in 2020. So how did you go about figuring out what to do, and then what did you do? What were the broad strokes on how to turn that around?
It's interesting. I was reflecting with Dave recently. He and I both started in the office the same day, May 15th or 18th, I can't remember which, of 2020. So again, picture the world shut down. No one else it's a 960,000 square foot building. No one else is there because they're all working from home. But Dave and I don't have any place to work from home because we're just, still moving our families. So we're in his office on the whiteboard, and he writes up in the corner, 2020, gain trust, earn trust. 2021, figure out a plan. 2022, start to implement plan, which is the smart thing to do,
so
right?
No plan even for a year, just gain trust.
Nope. Gain trust, which everyone tells you in change management, that's what you do. Like you don't start changing stuff. Well, then like 3 weeks later, we realized how bad the finances are and how long we'll be locked down with COVID, and thinking like, we can't wait. And, it ended up being 13 months for us to be in the room with people, to build the trust, to earn their trust, and then to be able to start making changes. So we had to start right away without the trust having been earned, which was significantly challenging. I wouldn't recommend it for anyone, but it was a kind of have to. So I think like first thing focused on, so, Dave is the primary communicator. I didn't have to think about the weekend services. I was thinking about the staff. And then we had Matt Sunstead, who was our CFO at the time, became our executive pastor of operations, was focused on the money and the property. So like between the three of us initially, building out the staff, like figuring out what the structure we're going to have, realizing that we had a financial model as far as multi-site that did not work and would not work and would sink us. So having to change the model significantly, which then changes what those people signed up for that were on staff. They're like, I didn't sign up for that. So then having to transition folks that were like, love what you're doing, but it's not me. Transition them out, transition new people in. And then once we it's probably a year, almost a year before we think we have the staff that's going to carry us forward. Now let's work on getting healthy. And we were working on health in between, but that was, for me, a big part of my focus was getting the right people there and working on the health of the staff.
Yeah, because the boat was sinking, right? So if you didn't start bailing water, it was over.
Yeah.
Is that what I hear you saying?
That's absolutely true. I mean, and I remember when we first got there, I think there was a lot of wise stewardship before we got there. So there was a fair bit of money in the bank, but we were bleeding so fast that there was a sense. And I think initially it's like, okay, you have 2 to 5 years of kind of burn rate. And then, we weren't there very long. And it's like, you might have 5 to 12 months of burn rate. It's like, oh, wow, that's completely different.
Yeah. How did you process that level of stress? I mean, you've got a couple years removed from it now. You left in 23, right?
Yeah, mid 23.
And we're recording this in 25. So you had, 24 months of distance now. When you look back at yourself, what did you do well to process that level of stress, change, pressure, and what would you do differently?
I think what gave me an advantage coming in was I knew I was on temporary assignment, meaning I knew I wasn't going to retire from Willow.
This wasn't a 20-year thing.
No, it really, and we talked about that openly up front. It's just a sense of like, I know for sure I'm supposed to be here and come in to help for X number of years, a short time to help, get this thing back on, to be a part of getting this thing back into a healthy place and a thriving church. So what that does is it gives you it keeps my identity separate from the church, which I think is healthy. Versus back at Granger, my identity was one in the same with the church. I'd kind of grown up with it, had been there. That was a really hard disconnect, later on when it was time to leave. But at Willow is a sense of like, I wasn't emotionally detached, but I was able to, my identity was detached from it. It's like, I want this thing to work. I knew it was a sprint. And so I think that helped. I think I had a lot of, I went to therapy. It was helpful. I had friends, pastors from other places that were from all over the world, really, that were cheering us on and that could be an outlet for me at times. I think things, you asked what's the things I got wrong, when we got squeezed. We had a couple times when like we were just taking it from congregants that were just mad, upset, emotional, yelling, screaming, open microphone kind of stuff, cussing. And I think I walked in the moment, I thought, man, I just need to love these people. And that's what we did for those 2 nights. But like 6 months later, I was still feeling the wounds from that and realizing, okay, like that stung. And I was probably too emotionally detached on that moment to feel the sting of it, but had to, work through it. And even now, when I reflect on it, it was probably the hardest 2 nights of my life, ministry life.
How do you, because you're right, grieving your losses is so important. So how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, I think time helps. I think what helps to, when you're in the moment, when you're fighting the battle, and I've never been at war, but my sense is like you're in the middle of a war, and like you don't even know if you're making progress. You think you're doing the right things, but you don't know if you're making progress. So I think there was a sense there, there was probably 18 months there where it's like we're doing everything we think are the right things, and we're not seeing one bit of progress yet. But what happens eventually then, and we did, is like, okay, it's starting to work in pockets. We're starting to see some health here. Brand new people are coming to church. And by the time I left, 65% of the church was brand new, full of life, had never had the previous pastor as their pastor, didn't have the baggage and wounds that some of the long timers had had. So that's helpful in the healing process as well. It's like, man, we went through a difficult battle.
A little bit of progress. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else about that season, that assignment that you're reflecting on now?
I'm just so grateful, like for that's in my 40 years of ministry, that's a piece of it. I really am grateful. Learned so much from it. I would have no idea. I wouldn't have much of an idea of how to help a church turn around from a really dark season, or how to recover from the immediate loss of a pastor. How to help a board that's dysfunctional get healthy. A board that had to not dysfunctional from the stance of it, they did anything wrong. Dysfunctional from the stance of they had to run the church by themselves without pastors for 2 years, and not a small church. So helping them kind of like reframe into getting out of the weeds and back to like a healthy governance level. So like I'm just so grateful for all those experiences. And it's still my home church. So I get to sit there from week to week. And I'm far enough removed now, 2 years removed now, that I don't walk in and think about the lights of the screen or the carpet. I can sit there and enjoy and worship. So that feels good.
It's pretty remarkable that you can still worship there. And I mean, I've had that experience at Connexus Church now. Now, it was a decade ago that I stepped out of the lead pastor role. But what makes it possible, do you think, for church leaders who were former staff to be able to still worship? Because that's pretty rare. And that's kind of the norm for former staff at Connexus, which is a tribute to our lead pastor, Jeff Brody, who's done a great job of that. But like, what are the conditions that make it possible because most of the time you either discover former church staff who aren't attending church or who had to go across town to a different church. Had to, in brackets, quotation marks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think there's a posture of humility that's super important. I get to talk to a lot of staff transitioning away from a church. And so then I get to practice it, right? To see if I actually can practice what I say. So I think there's a posture of humility to say, everyone leaves a church, leaves a place, but in this case, leaves a church, and there's a little bit of push and there's a little bit of pull, and those two numbers add up to 100%. So the push could be, I hate my elders and I'm so tired of this place and they're driving me out. So it's an 80% push. You feel pushed, 20% pull to what's next. Sometimes it's 100% push and you don't know what's next, but you just know you have to leave. Sometimes it's a 95% pull. My pull to Willow was probably 90% pull, 10% push from where I was, 90% pull. It was just the vision it was like I had to do it. But I think like a sense of that, whatever reason, whatever the percentage is, there are things that you like wish for different, that you would have done different, that you can't believe they haven't done yet, that, counsel you gave them that they're not following, whatever. You just have to like have a posture of humility and realize I'm not the master of the universe. Like this isn't on me. I don't necessarily have the best idea. The Spirit of God is still alive and at work with these leaders that I'm stepping away from. And if you can have that posture and then really just keep your mouth shut, because you are going to have thoughts. You are going to want to say something. Your previous leaders, 2 months after you leave or 2 days after you leave, they're going to do something or say something. Your emotions are going to be high because you've been there for 2 years or 5 years or 15 years. And you just have to have a lot of self-discipline to, breathe some prayers internally and say, God, help me not say anything in this moment, and be supportive, even when you don't feel like it. It's been great for us to because I really want to be left there wanting to continue to support Dave and Sean and the rest of the team there, because they're doing really good and really hard work. And now I can help them in a different way.
You have conversations with lead pastors and executive pastors across America and probably around the world. What is the secret or off the record conversation they're having that every church leader needs to hear?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And are you asking like between senior pastors and executive pastors, or just in general?
When you sit around a fire pit, you got a beautiful fire pit in your backyard. When you sit around a fire pit, when you're lingering over a 2-hour meal, what are the conversations that nobody really wants to have in public that keep coming up?
Yeah. I think one thing that comes to mind is there's a sense when you're leading in a church, doesn't matter if it's senior pastor, executive pastor, or any other role, there's a sense that you can't be vulnerable. And you wish you could. Like you really want to be, but you don't see how you can be, because you try once or twice and it comes back to bite you. And so then you're like, never again. And so it's either like people that are in your congregation that have put you on a pedestal and you feel like you need to stay there, or they're your staff who you pay, who just has a different dynamic, that you just feel like you can't be honest. And so what I hear like around fire pits and stuff with pastors is just a bit like almost not an excessive vulnerability, but like, man, like I'm so glad I can finally like talk real here, because I can't. Yeah. There's like nowhere in life that I can, and it feels like it. I don't know that it's true. It sure feels like it though. They'll be like, even like a lot of pastors don't, they might want everyone in their church in a small group. A lot of them aren't small groups themselves because of that. They don't feel like they can. Some that are, still just feel like everyone's looking to them for the right answer at whatever that small group topic is. They feel like they can't say, I'm struggling with my wife right now, or, I just yelled at my kid. I don't know that it's true that they can't, but they sure feel that way. And so, they get a chance to kind of lower the guard a little bit and talk to some people that are in the same seat, same chair. You hear some of that come out.
And without betraying confidences, is it things are not going well at home, even though they're going well at the church? Or is it personnel issues? Or is it some kind of inner struggle? Like, are there common refrains or common themes that you hear from pastors? Because, I'm guessing of the tens of thousands of people hearing this episode, some have that outlet. Some have got a fire pit. Some have got friends they can go to dinner with. Then others are sitting there and they're like a corked bottle, when the pressure's building and they don't know when they're going to blow. And I'm just wondering, what are the frequent flyer issues that you would hear without betraying any confidences of specific cases?
Two categories come to mind. One would be family. So it's a struggle in a marriage. It's, my wife told me she doesn't even want to be married to me anymore, but we're staying together because we kind of both feel like we have to. It's, my kids struggling with their sexuality and I don't know what to do. And I can't tell anyone about it because it'll reflect badly on me. It's all those kinds of things. It's my kids having addiction. I'm having to do a drug test on my 18-year-old every Friday night. And it's like things like that. It's like, I can't talk about it. They feel like they can't talk about that stuff out loud because it reflects poorly. The other category would be, just tension within running the church and like just being completely exhausted and worn out from that, having a sense of like imposter syndrome. Like I'm in over my head, but surely can't admit that. And I've got there's something broken. It might be my relationship with my board. It might be like my staff's a mess, but I don't know how to fix it. It might be I'm being asked to do too much outside of like my comfort zone or my skill set. But we just don't have anyone else to do it. There's a bit of that, it's almost an exhaustion. You hear a lot of pastors will do a sabbatical or extended study break once a year. They don't get a whole lot of studying done because they're just exhausted. And they spend 3 weeks
right. Another
within detox. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I appreciate that. And, I think you've processed fairly well over your time in ministry. Who have you turned to? Think back a decade, 15 years ago, 5 years ago. How did you process that kind of stuff?
I think in the healthy seasons, which, just grateful to God, most of that was as far as like having a healthy team around me. Then you could rely on the team because like we're all in this together. We're unified in vision. So back when, you mentioned Tony, when it was me and Tony and Ken Meyer and Mark Waltz and Mark Beeson and Jason Miller, Rob Wagner, Granger, we were in a really sweet time for probably a decade, and really could lean on each other for that. But I do think it's healthy for pastors to have someone outside of their team and organization. So, I've always had that. It's been a little bit different over the seasons of people that I can rely on. I've got my best friend, you actually met him recently, Danny. He's a pastor in Texas. He and I are in vastly different organizations and even phases of life, but he's someone I can talk to about anything, art stuff, personal stuff, ministry stuff, church stuff, leadership stuff. And so it's been a long, throughout the 4 decades, it's been a little bit different, but there's always been someone and something like that.
You and Faith, your wife, have been together for many decades. How has ministry been on your marriage?
Yeah, 35 years. Interesting. So it was very different when we were married in local church and now married in kind of church adjacent. We're working with churches, but not in a specific church. The difference for her, and it was an identity shift for her, she loved being a pastor's wife. She loved just being able to be supportive. She was never on paid staff, but she was always supportive and jumping in and volunteering and organizing and meeting with the ladies and pulling staff together, and love that. So when we moved to Texas to work with Vanderbloemen, and then suddenly I'm getting on a plane for 3 days a week, and she's going sometimes to church by herself. Sometimes I'm there, but we're not doing it together. That was a struggle. We had a shift. It probably was a 2-year struggle of like, okay, we've got new identities. We have to shift into a new way of relating with each other. So when we came back to Willow, she was delighted because she got to be a pastor's wife again. And then even now, staying in Willow as far as our involvement and volunteer engagement, none of her friend networks changed when I launched out and started leading Smart. So, but ups and downs, right? And especially in those years of raising the kids in the church in the spotlight, I got to interview
Not
my
easy.
adult kids. No. It was fun to talk to them recently and just talk to them about like what was hard, what was good about being raised in the church and in the spotlight. And they just kind of unpack, as 20 something to 30 something adults, 4 kids, they got to unpack like how that affected them, how it impacted them, how it led them to where they are today, what was good about it, what was hard about it.
Yeah, I love my boys, but neither of them desires to be in the spotlight in any way, shape, or form. I wonder if that has something to do with ministry. I think it might.
Yeah.
Being raised in that. Yeah, and they're doing great things. Okay, shifting gears a little bit. I love the 40 Lessons in 40 Years of Ministry resource that you made available to church leaders. We'll link to it or to where they can find it. I thought it was really good. You've got some real nuggets there. It's just short, pithy wisdom nuggets that I've really appreciated. I want to drill down on some of those. You say conflict isn't the enemy, avoidance is. You're reading a lot of people's mail. Unpack that.
Yeah, I think most of us, and I wish I could measure it. Feels like 95% of church leaders avoid conflict, and because you feel like it's ungraceful. It's not. We're in ministry to love on people, to show them grace, to go the extra mile, all that. So you feel like, especially if it's in a staff relationship or a leadership relationship, that where you've got a conflict, it's like, man, let's just see. Let's just we'll love on them and see if it goes away. It rarely does, right? And so I do think avoidance is the enemy more often than conflict is the enemy. And so we have to have disciplines, have systems in place so that we really, don't allow ourselves to spiral into that. I find with leadership, I work a ton with leadership teams at churches. And so I'll sit in their meetings and coach them, over time, 6, 12, 18 months. And what I'll find is they'll be circling back to the same staff problem over and over and over and over again. Still, no one's talked to that person. And it's taken so much energy and time, and sideways energy. And it's like, let's just have a conversation. Let's hear from their perspective. Let's draw some lines in the sand. Let's say, hey, this can't continue. We got to see some changes here. Let's put a plan together. That's hard to do, and leaders rarely do that.
So let's go into a related one. Hire slowly, fire kindly, always with clarity. So I want to take you back to when you realized you had to do some right sizing at Willow, so to speak, right? And you're probably at that point laying off like 100 or more staff, or high dozens of staff. That's sort of a lot of pastors' nightmares, right? I sit down with a lot of leaders, and it's that one guy on the executive team who has been there for 30 years, is making too much money, but kind of retired a decade ago, and they don't know how to make it happen. You've got to go in there and make some wholesale change. So we're going to hire slowly, fire quickly, always with clarity. How do you do that when you got a tough assignment like the one you had recently?
What I encourage church leaders to do, and especially in this case, are the folks that we had to off ramp from Willow, it was because of financial crisis, which it came from a leadership crisis, turned into a financial crisis, and so in most cases, to no fault of their own, it's just like we can't afford
Right.
to
So
pay
that
you
one's a
anymore.
little easier, I guess, because you can just say, it's just, but then somebody, okay, I've been sitting next to so-and-so for 20 years. I lose my job. He doesn't. How do you explain that?
I don't think you have to explain everything. I do think
Okay.
I do think
Yeah.
that clarity is important with that person. But you'll find everyone around that person demanding for the details, and I think you have to be real careful with that, and more all the time, just because of HR or employee law kind of stuff. But I do think, like here's where I find the kindly. So hire slowly, fire kindly, and fire quickly, and with clarity. Is that person needs to know where they weren't measuring up. It's going to follow them the rest of their life if they don't know. So, and you're not responsible for what they do with that information, but I do think it's important to have a process to communicate clearly. You know, you might not be measuring up with performance, like you can't do your job very well, or it might be culture. It might be you're just not
Yeah.
living out our values. So they need to know what that is, and the kindly part comes with do it soon enough, and where you can care for that person. And I think especially in context of church, care for that person and care for their family for a little bit of time to help them make the bridge over to what's next for them. And I do that even when they did the church wrong. I mean, if they may have stole money or they may have had sex with someone that they're not married to, I'm still going to do everything I can to graciously help them transition. Obviously, they can't be on the team anymore, but we're going to help. For the sake of their family.
Yeah.
And I'm not paying for 2 years, but I'm going to figure out what's the appropriate amount, and be kind in the firing and help them transition, help them move on to what's next.
So let's take it into a specific situation. There's that person who's been on staff for a couple of decades, makes a big income, really hasn't been contributing, a bit thorny. Do you lead with the reasons, or do you just say, hey, we got a tough situation here. You're not going to be on the team moving forward, and then let them ask for reasons? Like what is your advice on that? What's your best advice?
So it'd be a little bit circumstantial. If there is a money reason why you're making it's like we need to cut 2 people from the team. We're choosing these 2 because they've been slackers or they don't perform well or whatever. So I might lead with the whole staff. Hey, we're gonna have to lay off 2 people, and we're having some conversations tomorrow about it. So I just want you to know that's coming. And then you're having the conversations with the 2 people, and they're gonna say, "Why me?" And then you're gonna say, "Well, we don't have money to pay for as many staff as we have anymore, and there are some things that led us." And let me just be straight with you. It shouldn't be the first time they're hearing it. It should be something that showed up in previous conversations. Otherwise, it's just unkind. But it's something that's like, man, we've been talking about this over the last 6 months. We just haven't seen a lot of improvement. And so that's why it wasn't easy to choose you, but that's why it became clear that your positions are being terminated.
And when you do it well, because I'm sure you've done it poorly over 4 decades, I'm sure you've done it well. When you do it well, everyone goes, oh yeah, that makes total sense. Thank you so much. Or does it sometimes blow up in your face?
Even if you do it well, not everyone's going to understand.
Yeah, people are going to leave upset.
People are going to leave upset because they love that person. And that's the closest staff person there too. And that's my small group leader. And there must be something going on here. We can't trust the leader. I mean, there's a bit of that. And I think in those, you can only say what you can say. And I think the closer people are to the center, you can say a little bit more. But when you get much further out from that, and you can't say a lot, and people will still not understand. And you just kind of move forward with integrity and just keep making really good decisions. So it's like they don't understand that decision, but they've seen 9 other decisions that they trust you with. And it's like, okay, there must be something going on here I don't see.
Yeah. And I think that's something too, you hinted at it earlier, and it's worth drilling down on. There's almost there's a community aspect to church that's super helpful and healthy. And then there's a gossip access to, part of church that is not healthy. And it seems when there's some kind of termination or parting of the ways, people seem to have a unhealthy need to know. And you would think, well, that's more true of smaller churches, but it's true of a large church with social media. Hey, so-and-so got let go, blah, blah, blah. How come? I think you're right. My instinct over the years has been less and less public information that not everybody needs to know. It's not a secret or whatever, but it's like, no, this person's dignity, story, and part of leadership is being misunderstood, right? I'm just going to take some bullets right now for a little while, and then wisdom is proved right down the road by all of her children. What are your thoughts on that? Like, how much should you be saying publicly, and where is the line on that?
Yeah, I would agree with you. In this day and age, not much. It used to be like, don't record the meeting.
Carey
Now
is
it's
no
like,
longer with us. Or do you even,
yeah,
people, this comes up in our Art of Leadership Academy. And I'm like, I think you should only announce something publicly if they had a senior public role, period. Like if the lead pastor's gone, right? Or one of the teaching team is gone, maybe that's worthy of some kind of acknowledgement. But if you're letting go
it
admin
depends.
staff,
Yeah,
you have to make
it
an
depends on the
announcement.
size of the church. If it's a church of 200 and they have 3 staff and you're letting one go and they've been there for 14 years, then it's like, okay, we're probably having to say something broadly about this. And it's maybe not a Sunday morning, but it may be your quarterly stakeholders meeting, whatever you do at your church. I do agree with you. Like, if it's a church much bigger than that, really, I'm only saying something publicly if it's the worship pastor that they see every single week, or it's the senior pastor, the lead, the teaching pastor. It's someone that's really high profile for the entire church. Otherwise, keeping it pretty downscale. And I would also say, like, when I'm like talking, like, you're probably communicating that to your staff, potentially.
Sure.
So if you're talking to your staff, I'm like calling them to the high road. I'm saying, hey guys, like when this information goes out, all of you are carrying a metaphorical bucket of water or a bucket of gas. And when people start to flare up about this, you can pour water on it and you can douse it and you can say, you know what, you don't have all the information and let's just trust our leadership. Or you can pour gas on it and you can say, yeah, I bet they did put something under the rug. I bet there's something there that we don't know. There's probably people we can't trust. And we all have that option. And it's with little tiny words or short phrases or gestures or facial inflections in those kinds of things when we're either pouring water or pouring fire on the situation.
What is the single biggest hiring mistake that you keep seeing churches make?
Oh, I think one comes immediately to mind would be hiring for skill and not for culture fit. The person can do it. They've done it, but you don't dive deep enough to see if they're going to be a culture fit and like really live out your values. I heard Jerry Hurley at Life Church, Jerry said in relation to values, he said, don't hire people and then bring them in and teach them your values. Hire people who already live out your values and then just reinforce them. And I just think that's so smart. And then the obvious question is, well, how do I find out if they're living out our values? So, and depending on what your values are, you figure out ways to do that. Spending time with them. I think we know that best when we're hiring from within the church. We've already seen them live out our values. It's harder when they live in Albuquerque and you're in South Bend. You have to figure out ways to get close to them and proximate to them to see if they're living out your values.
How do you do that? How do you determine that when you're making a hire?
Spend time. So, bring them in for, we're probably not we're probably not moving someone from another part of the country unless it's a higher level position. So it's worth, let's go there. I've like flown across the country with, an associate, and let's just spend 2 days in their environment. Let's talk our way into being at family dinner with them. Let's spend some time with people that they've been doing ministry and life with.
So you go
Let's talk to some of them.
You don't necessarily just bring them to you. You go to them and see them in their native enviorment. Wow.
Both
I haven't heard about that.
And I think like an extended, like you bring them in and they're with you from noon to 4 p.m. You're just going to see the very best. But if you figure out a time, you bring them in and it's like, you're here for 2 days and you're going to hang out with these people and you're going to this barbecue and I'm going to take you to a movie and let's go do this over here. And I want to drive you around town and those kinds of things, you get extended time in a car in conversations with someone, you start to see who they are pretty quickly.
What do you look for?
Again, it depends. Like I think if your values are dialed in, you're like, okay, I'm really looking for these 5, 6, 7 things that we have determined are important in our culture. I'm looking for, I'll just talk generally for a second. I'm looking for someone who isn't trash talking the place that they just came from or are coming from. That they're not negative about their previous church, even if they got fired, or even if they quit, whatever. It's like, and I really appreciate that. If it's someone who, another thing would be if it's someone who has messed up in their life at some point in a public way. And, we've all messed up, but it's been public and they got let go 10 years ago because of, like, I want to know if in that, like, are they hiding the fact that they went through that? Or are they like, that's part of their story now and they're actually living through their story. And it's part of like, that's part of who they are and how they're leading today. I think that's really important. I think just, graciousness, humility, the way that they treat the server at the restaurant that you guys are eating at, a sense of like, is this, especially if they're going to be on your team, is this someone I want to wake up every day and just like go to work with? If you're getting any sense of like, this person's annoying or obnoxious, or I don't think I would, not a good fit for your team. Maybe if you have a large organization, they could be somewhere on the team, but maybe not your team.
Yeah, it's interesting, the phrase that's coming up to my mind, and feel free to disagree. And this isn't the sole determinant. There is values, faith, the whole business. But the phrase easy hang comes up. Is this person an easy hang? Like, is this somebody that you would want to be on a long trip with? We're planning our fall retreat for our team. We're looking at bringing in one of our contractors. And, that person might end up staying with my wife and I, in our part of the Airbnb that we're renting out. And I'm like, oh yeah, that'd be easy. That'd be easy. Or if you're like, ooh, I don't know, like, do we want that person? Might not be like, is there anything about that ease of hanging out with somebody that is actually a factor?
Absolutely. And the churches I've been at, and even at Vanderbilt, we would always have a list of those people. Like, we have no positions open right now, but like, we have a list of the, 30 people in the church or 2 people, 3 people in the church that like, man, if they could be on our team, that'd be amazing because they add so much value in any room they're in. They raise the energy. They're fantastic. I don't know if they could do a specific role, but like, we want to look at them first. And it's I hadn't thought of those words, easy hang, but that's a piece of it for sure.
Well, it's strange because, we're a tiny team, we're a remote company, but they were all here last month, like 6 weeks ago. And it's funny because when this one was at my house, so it was pretty easy to do. But when they walked in, it was like they were there yesterday and everything was easy and everything was fine. And those were long days, like some 12, 16-hour days together. But if it's easy, work is hard enough. Why make it more difficult with the people that you work with, right? That's the way I look at it. So we're blessed. You mentioned spotting talent. So many leaders I talk to are struggling to develop a leadership pipeline. They don't know how to do it. What are some key lessons about spotting talent?
Yeah. So it's part of what we just talked about in a sense of like, who do we think would be great on our team? I was thinking as you were talking, like a great way to vet that, like, so your retreat, and I my team's offsite as well, of like bringing in a contractor who doesn't even know you're thinking about hiring them or asking them to be on your team, but like see if you can survive in an Airbnb for 2 days together, 3 days together.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things. And I think that's true with hiring staff as well. So what I'm looking for, like when I'm thinking spotting talent, I'm looking for someone who's like growth minded. They're like, when I look in the rearview mirror of their life, they've grown some things, they've led some things. It's not hypothetical.
In other words,
what would you do
already leading, right?
They're already leading. They're already leading at a high level. I'm looking for like influencers, like galvanizers. For most positions, not every position, I'm looking for someone who can galvanize a room around a project, around whatever we're trying to get off the ground at that time. Looking for someone who's humble, who's a learner, who's teachable. That's super important in just about every position. I think high EQ is another one that comes to mind. Someone that knows how to turn down the heat of the fire in a room when they walk in when there's some tension. They just got the EQ to like, okay, we got to bring this down, or we've got to delay this conversation, or we've got to be a little bit more engaging with this person because they're coming from a difficult place. Whatever, they're just tuned in with a high EQ.
That's true. That all resonates. Those are the people I want on my team for sure. Couple of other principles I want to drill down on. Momentum is fragile. You probably had seasons where momentum has evaporated. What happens? How do you talk about the fragility of momentum? Because I think if you've led for a little while, you realize that is very true.
Yeah. Yeah, probably the clearest for me would be at Granger. I was there for 20 years. And we probably had momentum for 12, maybe 14 years, where, like it felt like everything that we tried just turned to gold. It's just like
No matter
magic.
what you did, just like, boom, there it is.
Yep. And when you have it like that, you really begin. I mean, the shadow side of that is you begin to think, it's something we're doing. Like we just found the formula, man. We got this thing dialed in. Come to us to find the secrets. And people were, I mean, by the hundreds coming to Granger to figure out what was going on. And so like, but momentum is amazing. It's awesome. I mean, I'd much rather have positive momentum than negative. On the other side, and we went there for a season at Granger where suddenly it wasn't working and we started plateauing and then we started declining and then offerings started trailing off and then people started getting mad and leaving. And when that happens, you begin to, like for us, we got desperate because we had positive momentum for so many years. And it's like you start pulling all these levers and then you don't even know if what you're pulling is working because you pulled 9 levers at once. And sometimes when you're desperate, you just begin to point fingers and you say, well, it's because of you or you're not leading well. And that can have a devastating impact on culture and attitudes and all that. I think at Willow was different walking into a place that all of the momentum was going in the wrong direction when we got there. Of course, for 4 decades, arguably, it was going in the right direction. But by the time we got there, it was really going down. And so, the church was in a state of crisis and conflict. And then it's like you're trying to slow this flywheel down and turn it around so you begin to feel the positive momentum again. And that took arguably 2.5, 3 years.
When you feel the air coming out of the balloon, what are some pivots or moves that are helpful? Like when you experience that at Granger, what did you start to do?
I think pulling together the team, and I'd say first, like making sure that you have the right people at the table. And I'm thinking a lead team right now of an organization. Do we still believe we have the right people at the table? Are these the people that can help us? Can together, can the 5 or 7 of us pull this thing out? So taking some time to figure that out. And I think actually having an outside voice in that, you just can't see it yourself. We called in a guy named Doug Slabaugh at the time, and he could see stuff we couldn't see because he didn't have the emotion connected to it. And so he could just come in and kind of diagnose some stuff, help us figure out where we're missing. You end up missing each other in conversations, and he could help us figure that out, and help us then like lay down a path for where we're going. Like for us, it's like, okay, we tend to think like if we just keep doing what we were doing 5, 10, 15 years ago, it's going to start working again. Not realizing we've woken up and it's a brand new world and that stuff's not going to work. We got to figure it out together. And having someone from the outside is super helpful with that.
What do we call healthy in the church that you think is unhealthy? I'd love your broad thoughts on that. Like there are practices that kind of pass for normal today. Are there any that you notice in that category that we would say, hey man, this is awesome, but it's not?
I think the frenetic drivenness of an unhealthy leader whose charisma and personality is growing the church. So it appears to be healthy, but it's being driven from an unhealthy leader, and it's potentially, it doesn't have to be, but potentially creating some toxicity among the staff and in the church as well, where you're measuring growth without health instead of healthy growth. Obviously, there's no one that's against growth, but there's a lot of us that by practice, by observation, we're against health because we're not concerned about either the health of our people who are just, going from one activity to the next with possibly not actually being formed spiritually, or the health of our staff who are having to focus so much on the ministry that they're neglecting marriage, family, other healthy relationships.
How do you know a leader is unhealthy?
I think there's probably several things on that. What first comes to mind would be a leader who doesn't listen to counsel or to I'll just leave it at doesn't listen, period. Um, so, the whole thing of speak truth to power, which is really, really, really hard for those that aren't in power. It's hard to speak up the org chart to power. I've heard Andy Stanley say information flows downhill. So the CEO, the senior pastor, they're going to be the last ones to hear the truth. A lot of them like it that way. They don't really want the truth. And especially those that have been in it for a long time because they've taken some arrows and it didn't feel good. And so they'd kind of much rather not know. And because what they're doing in their minds might be, is still working, it might still be working to however they define that. So I think that's probably the first thing I think of unhealthy. I think, as you look at family, marriage, relationships, self-discipline, all those things, I think that there's some signs there as well.
Yeah. Tim, anything else, like 40 years of ministry, any other observations that you want to touch on before we wrap up?
Someone asked me the other day, because they knew I was doing this 40 lessons thing from 40 years of learning. They said, well, okay, just tell me the top one. What's the one? So they kind of forced me to it, but it didn't take me long to land there. And I think like probably the best learning for me, and which helped me like pivot and posture my attitude and heart, is deciding to believe the best about other people, about their intentions, their motives, their words. I think I have learned that that is not natural. I think about it like when you're driving in traffic. Like if someone cuts me off, I'm super ticked off at them and want to
Rightly
run them
so.
off the road. But if I like am in a hurry because my wife said she needs me to come to the hospital and I cut someone off, I want them to be super gracious and understanding and believe the best in me. But more often than not, what's natural is we don't believe the best in others. We believe that they actually had an intention to hurt us, a motive to come across that way. They're actually being passive aggressive with us. And I realize when you believe the best, it is going to bite you every now and then. You're going to get it wrong. You're totally going to get it wrong sometimes. But I'd much rather get it wrong by believing the best than get it wrong by constantly just believing the worst in people's motives. And that's been something that's probably a lifelong learning. I don't get it right day to day, week to week, but it's something that's present in my mind. And that I think, man, if we all just did that a little bit better, goodness, it would just be different.
But that means you can't get cynical. That's something our mutual friend, Tony Morgan, and I used to talk about, because I remember at dinner with Tony one day and he's like, age and cynicism, they go together. And gosh, I miss Tony. But, how have you guarded against cynicism?
I think that's it. Like it's like trying to remind myself all the time to believe the best, to believe I don't have all the answers. I don't have all the information. I wasn't in the room when they made that decision. I'm not in that person's heart to know why they, even if like my brain 98% believes that that they had ill intent. It's like I'm gonna like my heart's gonna say like in how I act at my best anyway. I'm gonna try to like communicate that I'm believing the best. So I'm saying like, tell me more about that. Can you give me help me see that through your lens. Help me see that through your context. The other way I would say, like, this might be a little bit of rabbit trail, but to keep from getting cynical is just get out of your echo chamber, whatever that is. Politics comes to mind, just in the, where you're just in an echo chamber where you're just listening to people that say exactly what you think and tell you why the other people are evil and they hate America or hate their country or whatever. And we get in these echo chambers and we get super cynical about the world. We get depressed. We're negative because we're just hearing the same stuff over and over and over again. I don't think your head should be in the sand, but I think if we get out of our echo chambers and begin to believe the best and want to learn, like have a learner's like, I want to know why you landed there. I talked to one of my kids recently and they landed somewhere completely different, like night and day from what they were raised in for 18 years. And I was like, it was everything within me. Just say, help me understand. How did you land there? What are your thoughts around that? What informed your values and thinking around that?
Yeah. Well, Tim, you produced a lot of resources over the years. What would you like to direct people to? Like, where can they find you online these days? We'll link to, if it's okay with you, the 40 lessons in 40 years. That'd be cool.
That'd be great.
It can be on your site.
Yeah, if
wherever.
if they go to leadingspark.com /Carey, we'll put all the resources there, but we'll have a link to the ebook. We'll have a link to the podcast we're doing on that topic right now. We'll have a link to a couple. We talked earlier about kind of getting with some people around a fire pit. We'll link to some gatherings we're doing for both executive pastors and then separately for lead pastors that are coming up this winter. So I'd say cool. leadingspark.com /Carey. They'll find some good resources there.
Tim, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate the time.